Hey, Terry Caliendo from Dedicated Managers here again, and I just wanted to talk about an error that comes up when you first start implementing the Firestore. So if you don't have this new settings variable timestamps in snapshots and set it to true. So I've got it commented out here, and so this is what you would typically see probably from most documentation that's out there on how to start up a Firebase connection. So you won't have this settings, obviously, because it's commented out, and you probably won't have it anywhere. So you get this error that says the behavior for date objects stored in Firestore is going to change, and your app may break. So what they want you to do is then go and in your, after you fire up your Firestore, they want you to create this settings object and then apply it to the Firestore. Or you can just take this object like I do. I just take this object and put it right in the settings call. So that's what I'm doing here. Rather than doing two lines, I'm just putting that object right in the settings function call. So without it, you get that issue, and with it, this goes away. And I just want to talk about what it's actually doing, and it's basically just changing the way the dates are being stored and returned from Firebase. So if I go look in my application, I'm using date objects in. If I load a client here, and I look at that client, the entity for that client. I have a bunch of different data that I store, and one of those things is the date that the object was created, or that the form or the entity was originally created. So I created this one yesterday. I also have a last updated, and so I updated it today. And you can see that this is a very readable format. This is a JavaScript date object format, I believe. And so that's the returned value that's coming from the server, because I'm not manipulating that at all. I'm just sticking it in this data prop of exactly what came back from the server, from the Firebase Firestore server. So that's exactly what I get. And again, that is because I am using the old format. Now, if I switch to including this, so this is a setting that says, hey, I'm up to date with Firestore. I've understood that there was an old way of doing things, and now I'm saying, hey, I'm doing things the new way. So if you're just starting out with Firestore and you don't have any previous code, you put this in. You really don't have to worry about anything because you'll just use it the way it's going to be when I show you. If you put this in and you have old code that's expecting this date string to come back like this, you're going to have problems, because I'll show you how it comes back in a second. Is it's going to come back as a different object, and so you're going to have to do a little extra step, which is even told here in the issue that it tells you. You need to this is what I was getting back. This created at was returning this date object there. You can see it's telling me it's a date object. Now it's going to return a timestamp object, and you have to call on that timestamp object. You have to call toDate to get that date format back. And timestamp is I don't believe, I've looked it up. I've looked up JavaScript timestamp, and I don't see a Mozilla Developer Network on that function for JavaScript. So I'm assuming that is a Firebase object or a Firestore object, and I'll dig into that in a second, that I can show the actual object and how it gets this toDate return. So this is how it is now. I've uncommented that, so now I'm going to save that file and reload, which is going to reload the application. And now if we take a look, it's going to load my same variables over here, and this is again my store. So I'll look at that same variable on the data object, and now that created at is an object, and it's got nanoseconds and seconds on it. So it is no longer in that pretty string format. So you can see that if you're, whatever you're doing with this object, if you called data.createdAt and are expecting a string, you're not going to get it. You're going to get this, which is going to cause an error in your program. So that's why they talk about how, well, that error is gone now, how they talked about before that your app will break, because this will break your app by trying to send this new object where a date object was expected before. And so to get that date object back, all you have to do is call the toDate on it. So in my code, I've actually modified my code a little bit here. So this is my code for this main screen here, right here. So I'm just going to put a little button, and I've already done this code, so I'm just going to, I undid it, so now I'm going to redo it. So I'm just putting a button that says show at the bottom, and then I'm going to create a method show, and I'm going to create it down here in my methods section that's going to log the it's going to log that current entity, primary kinship caregiver, the current ID of what's calling it .data. So it's going to log this thing right here, this primary caregiver, current entity, primary caregiver, the ID that I'm calling in, which comes from up here in my routing. And then I'm going to output that data object so we can take a look at it here in the console. So if I go back to my code and I save it, and then we come back to the app is now reloading itself. It's a hot reload. And so if we go look, or I'm sorry, if we click show, we will now get that object output. That's my data object. And so here's that created at, which you can see is a timestamp object, which has that nanoseconds and seconds. So I should be able to, if I wanted to get that date object back. Instead of data, I'll do data.created. Did I use capitals? I think I did. .created at, I think in my database I use camel case capitals with capitals starting. And then I want to go to date, I believe is the function, and I can actually look that up on this object. I can go to this object and say, hey, I'm looking at the object here. Let me make this a little bigger. I'm looking at the object here, and here's the prototype for the object. So if I go down into the prototype, you can see that it has the toDate function, and that toDate function is actually going to, I can look at the code here if I click on this, and that toDate function is simply returning a new date object. So it is going to give me a date object back from this .2 milliseconds. So this .2 milliseconds is a function that returns the milliseconds from itself. So it's going to go get the milliseconds, and then it's going to pass those milliseconds to the date object and create a new one and return that. So when I run this code here, which is the toDate, which I just talked about, called on that created at, I should now get a JavaScript date object back. So I'm going to save that and then go back to my code, watch it reload. If it does, there it goes. And if I clear my history and click show, I've now got a JavaScript date object that was returned. So that's what's happening with that error, and that's what's going to change. So if you haven't already written code that needs to see this, you don't have to change anything. You're just going to get that object back, and then you can just work with that object going forward however you need to. But just know that that's what's being returned, and that's how to switch it to a date object that you can now manipulate locally. But I think you still need to return it to a, I'm not sure if you need to create a, the timestamp object before sending it back to the server. I'm guessing that Firebase Firestore will do that for you. So I'll do that in an update video at some point. Or if somebody wants to sees this and actually does it, can comment whether or not, if you send something back to the server, whether or not you need to, turn it back to a timestamp object before sending it, or if you can send this date object and it'll figure out what to do. But when it returns it, it's going to return it as the timestamp object. So there you go. Explanation. Hopefully that's helpful to somebody that comes across the a search for that to see if what you can do to understand and solve that that error that comes through. Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers. Please leave comments, questions in this comments question section below. Feel free to contact me at dedicatedmanagers.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.